Thanks, Cathal, and good morning, everybody. My name is Fiona Morley and I'm Head of Digital Programmes and Information Systems here at Maynooth University Library. And I'm delighted to welcome you all to Session 1, Service Change and Adaptation. We have 3 talks in this session, each of 15 minutes duration, and I'd like to welcome our 4 speakers, who I'll introduce in a moment. And please note that you can read all the speaker bios in the conference programme. And I'd ask attendees to hold your questions until after the 3rd talk, and feel free to use the chat area for this if you wish. So our first talk in this session will be given by Brendan Leen and Gethin White. Brendan is the Area Library Manager for the HSE South National Health Library and Knowledge Service, and has worked for many years promoting and teaching evidence-based practice. Gethin White is a librarian based in Dr. Stephen's Hospital, also part of the HSE National Health Library and Knowledge Service, and has over 15 years' experience of working in health information roles. Our second talk will be presented by Áine Myler. Áine is a Senior Executive Librarian for Kildare Library Service with responsibility for community outreach, cultural and educational programming and digital service, and has over 20 years' experience in the public library service. Our final speaker in this session is Áine Carey. Áine is the Teaching and Research Development Librarian here at Maynooth University Library, and she has worked for over 20 years as a library and information professional in the academic and private sector. So at this stage, I'll hand over now to Brendan and Gethin, who will speak to us first about COVID-19 and the development of an evidence response. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fiona. I'll just share my screen. While that's loading up, just 2 of the points I noted down myself. Jane, the library cannot exist without its people. Absolutely, absolutely true. And Professor Nolan, we didn't know what hit us. I think both of those points might be reflected in what I have to say here this morning. Thanks very much, everyone. Great introduction. Brendan Leen and Gethin White were both part of the National Health Library and Knowledge Service evidence team. It's one of the 6 virtual teams implementing the library strategy. And this morning, I'm going to talk about the COVID-19 evidence service, which was initiated in March 2020 and is very much ongoing. The evidence service provides literature searches and evidence summaries on questions relating to all aspects of COVID-19. We field questions from frontline healthcare workers, from health managers, and as we'll see later on, from the national clinical programs. I want to speak a little bit about that initial demand and the imperative for a response, and that didn't know what hit us feeling. We had, significant precursors. We had developed comprehensive literature searches for numerous programs within the health service, including the National Cancer Control Programme and the National Clinical Effectiveness Committee. But evidence summaries were very much new territory for us, and I'll explain a little bit how we went about ensuring the quality of those. And then Gethin will take us through some examples. Probably the most important question: why and how do evidence summaries matter? How do they impact the care of individual patients? When I say the COVID-19 evidence service was initiated, this is probably the moment, the 12th of March at 5:30 a.m, because it was at that time that one of our national directors wrote through to us requesting urgent evidence on the epidemiology of this new virus, community transmission, and the effectiveness of things like self-isolation and contact tracing, asymptomatic transmission. And there was also a debate at the time around whether it should be a 1 or 2 meter social distancing protocol. And by the way, he wanted a response at 11 a.m. We didn't quite make that deadline, but it did bring home to us the sort of tidal wave of demand for information about this new virus that was about to hit us. We needed capacity to meet that demand, but we also wanted to assure the quality of what we were producing. So the evidence team, as I said, was in place, minus, as Professor Nolan has said, several staff who were redeployed into the wider public health effort, but plus library staff from other teams, and also librarians from outside of the HSE who volunteered to help us in those early months. And we want to express my gratitude and our gratitude to those librarians who came on board with us. In order to guarantee the quality of what we wanted to do, as well as the speed of response, we developed a standardized protocol, which I'll go through shortly, and a standardized set of sources that we were going to search. What was the difference in COVID-19? I think the difference was that time evaporated and evidence needed to be provided in a condensed and synthesized format. Something that really helped us in our thinking was a workshop that we had with Professor Carl Hennigan in October 2019. This is when we were designing our own evidence team, and it was around designing an evidence service responsive to the needs of evidence-informed healthcare. And when more would we need that than last year? And two of the things particularly resonated with Carl, the workshop with Carl on the day, and resonated last year. That is identifying and asking the important questions. What are the questions that will make a difference? What are the questions that will make a difference to patient care? And also countering disinformation or misinformation. In the words of the WHO, we're not only fighting a pandemic, but also an infodemic. This is the first pandemic in which technology and social media have been marshaled on a global scale to keep people informed, productive and connected. However, there's also widespread circulation of disinformation or misinformation. And in the words of the WHO, misinformation costs lives. It affects people's confidence, threatens their uptake of diagnostic testing regimes or vaccination campaigns, polarizes debate, amplifies hate speech, and allows the virus to thrive. And the WHO called for the timely dissemination of accurate information. A great example currently is, of course, the vaccine program and some of the conspiracy myths that are circulating about the vaccine, such as it contains a microchip for government or corporate surveillance, that it actually alters the human DNA, or that it gives you COVID-19. And this has resulted in quite a shocking poll from December 2020 in the States, an Associated Press poll, which states that only 47% of Americans intend to get the vaccine. So to counter misinformation that was circulating, we wanted to adopt an evidence-informed approach, which is to acquire, appraise, and disseminate the best available evidence, and where possible to combine that with clinical expertise and patient values and preferences. To adopt a standard methodology and a common set of sources. We often had, because the evidence summaries were quite new to us, we often had librarians working in pairs or in sub-teams, both for peer review and for a little bit of moral support. And it was a dynamic environment with multiple questions being processed simultaneously. I think we've processed, at last count, 176 questions, many simultaneously within the team. So the protocol helped to ground us and to carve up the work. The protocol itself, we can divide into three different sections. The first preliminary section to do with formulating an answerable question and to assign question categories. The question categories were useful later on in applying the CEBM levels of evidence to get the best evidence to answer different types of questions. The main section of the protocol was how we constructed the literature search. And that was, again, a standardized process, building a base search in Embase and translating that into Medline and other databases and other sources. And then the final section, which was around producing the summary of evidence, passing through various editorials. And we would like to thank all the people, particularly all the clinical experts who helped in the expert review of the summaries for us, the doctors, nurses, allied health people, who took these and threw their critical eye over them for us. And then, of course, publication and dissemination. They were published in 3 different places on the library website, on Lennis, the institutional repository, and on the guidance and evidence repository. Just important to note that this time last year, the guidance and evidence repository didn't exist. This was a parallel project with the National Health Library, together with the wider research and evidence team. It was actually put together in a phenomenal 6 weeks. And it was a platform to disseminate interim clinical guidance around COVID-19. So now we had a platform where the guidance and the evidence sat side by side. And this is very much in line with modern thinking, and I guess, you know, it's transformative really that we've moved away from the notion of guidance as a static document, more into the area of living guidance and the combined evidence and guidance model. A very good example with Per Olaf and the good people at Magic App, and I'd encourage people to have a look at that website. That the guidance is informed and constantly updated by emerging evidence, and then in the process of updating the guidance generates more questions. And crucially also for the guidance and evidence repository, it had to be digitally accessible. So similar to what Jane was saying, moving from the idea of a physical entity into more electronic delivery. The old paradigm there of sort of question in, literature search produced, and vast quantities of literature sent out, that no longer was fit for purpose. And this is just very briefly a look at the new paradigm where the question comes in. It's considered at a triage meeting together with the national clinical programs and others. And there's various options for the question, but one being where there is no existing guidance to answer the question, or where the guidance needs to be updated, a summary of evidence is completed, and that is sent simultaneously both to the requester and back to the clinical program to authorize for publication. And that dialogue with the clinical programs often throws up new questions, and they come back to us in turn. Of course, we had to actively promote. We didn't just sit back and wait for questions to flood in, although they flooded in anyway, but we actively promoted the service with flyers, broadcast, email, and social media. And important to acknowledge the huge assistance we received from Laura Thomas and her team, the digital team, in putting together the digital infrastructure to enable us to provide this service. That is the HC Library website, Lennis, and of course the repository itself. I'm going to hand over to Gethin in 1 second, but 170 plus questions to date. The summaries range from 20 pages up to a mammoth document of 700 plus pages on telehealth. And why do these matter? They matter because synthesizing and providing an access point to the best evidence helps protect patients and health workers, helps to model and predict the course of the virus, and assists in the configuration and design of health services to fight COVID-19. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Gethin, who's going to take us through some recent examples.
Thanks, Brendan, and thanks to the organisers of this seminar. It's brilliant to be invited on. Richie Breno, the great Australian cricket commentator, once said, "Only speak if you can add something to the picture." So I'm just going to give you a few thoughts in answer to that question as to why do evidence summaries matter. Evidence summaries matter when they're being used by both healthcare staff and the general public. There's no use in having a 200-page guideline that nobody's going to read. I can remember standing close to the then Health Minister Simon Harris as a guidance document was being launched, and the Minister clutched the chunky document and said quite genuinely, "Where's the summary of the document?" To which somebody replied, "Minister, that is the summary." And we found that of the 170 or so questions we received, about half of them came from medical consultants, which is noteworthy because prior to this COVID evidence service, we would have had a very much smaller number of doctors using our service. So a good indicator that these summaries were important. We also received excellent feedback from the requesters saying that the summaries are being used as practical documents to inform healthcare practice during the COVID pandemic. So, I mean, there's no greater piece than them going to direct patient care. So we were delighted with that. Next. Here's just one of examples. It's not a particularly spectacular example, but what it's useful to see. We had tended to get the questions that came in were bracketed around areas in terms of what was in the news during the COVID pandemic at a particular time. So we got a lot of questions around what was an aerosol generating procedure. We had a similar one on was chest physiotherapy and AGP, for example. We also had questions around mental health, cardiology, and Professor Nolan would be interested in modelling as well. And it was sometimes the case that the evidence located in a search may have conflicted with internal HSE or policy, or the requester themselves who made the request may have had a particular viewpoint and not agreed with the outcomes of some of the searches, the evidence that we found. And it may simply have been that there wasn't enough evidence to actually answer a particular question. I mean, evidence was evolving all the time, and it's only latterly that we've had a higher standard of evidence. So to go back to what Brendan was saying, for our evidence team, it was important to have the search protocols that Brendan mentioned, and in fairness to him, largely devised to ensure a consistency of approach no matter which librarian ran the search. And similarly, the backup of a strong editorial team to appraise the search results made it an even more robust process. We also liaised with the HSE clinical programs. So if there was any conflict in terms of advice, we had a good process for trying to ensure consistency and that the best evidence was followed next. A good example we've got here is the topic of long COVID. We've highlighted this particular question because a topic like long COVID is more of a project than a question. It's an evolving area and the research is constantly changing. For searches such as this, the evidence team frequently had to update the summaries that we produced because the information so quickly became outdated. Indeed, having made the point about trying to ensure that documents are not too long, we did publish an evidence summary for a National Health Steering Group on telehealth, which ran to 631 pages. But in our defence, you could search by a particular condition, so you didn't have to wade through the entire piece. It's also important to note that not every question we received is going to require an in-depth evidence summary. Some of the questions that we received, it was simply not appropriate for the team to attempt to answer, or they didn't require an in-depth summary. So not everything necessarily fits into the same box, but the long COVID piece was a particularly challenging one just due to the change that was continually happening. Next. And here's another one, a very recent one on use of face masks. Again, we received several requests around the topic of face masks. This one is a useful example because it demonstrated how, as an evidence team, we changed slightly the format of the summaries in response to the feedback that we got from requesters. They wanted the main points to be summarized. If people are familiar with so-called point-of-care tools like UpToDate or BMJ Best Practice, it's really about synthesizing the evidence and having it in a very condensed form that people who have very little time can absorb the evidence and that it can have its maximum impact. So this was an example of us trying to respond to the feedback that we've got. And I suppose the only good thing about the length of the time the pandemic has extended is that a higher quality of study has been published as time has gone on, and this has meant that we can be a little more confident about some of the conclusions that we made in summaries. I mean, earlier on we were relying on more observational studies and generally a lower level of evidence, so that is a bonus. Sorry, if you could just go back one slide there. Here's just a quick infographic on some of the feedback that we received from some of the people who submitted questions to the summary. So, really positive, and it is an ongoing piece, and hopefully the challenge for us now is to take this on and ensure that the processes that we've taken from this COVID evidence experience are there after the COVID pandemic has passed, and which is something I guess Jane touched on in her talk. Just hand back to Brendan there for the final piece.
Sorry, Fiona, I know we're running over, but this is the last slide, I promise. What have we learned? Important to get this slide in, I think, because it echoes some of the things that Professor Nolan and Jane has said previously. I think the huge commitment of library staff over the period of COVID-19, that the service couldn't exist without the staff. The combination of on-site and remote working and the flexibility of staff in working across different teams. I think the important contribution, as Professor Nolan mentioned, of library staff to the wider public health effort. And as a positive, COVID-19, I think, has accelerated progress and innovation in areas like remote working, digital solutions, and quality improvements. Sorry for running slightly over, Fiona. Thanks very much. I'll hand you back.
Thanks very much, Brendan and Gethin, for that very detailed, interesting presentation. And certainly, I think definitely now is the time where we need evidence-based research more than ever. And I really did like the concept of the living guidance. So thanks very much for that. I'll hand over now to Anne, who's going to speak to us about supporting our community through COVID-19, engagement and innovation from Kildare Libraries. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks very much, Fiona. I will try and just bring up my slides now. Yeah, hopefully everybody can see and hear me, or I feel very validated as a middle child. Just firstly to say a huge thank you to Cathal and Helen and Elaine and all the team at MU for inviting me along to speak about work in Kildare Public Libraries this morning, and also a big thank you to Jane for her inspiring keynote and her very kind words about public libraries work. This morning I'm just going to talk to you about how Kildare Libraries is working with a wide range of community partners through the COVID-19 pandemic, and the two approaches we have taken to that, which is firstly supporting vulnerable groups by helping individuals to stay connected and helping to provide CPD supports for frontline workers throughout the county, and also how we've been supporting our school communities through curricular learning and providing positive mental health, and also some nice STEM support work we've been doing with some primary school girls in the county. So first I'm going to talk to you about supporting families and sharing the learning. So through the Department of Rural and Community Development, a funding opportunity became available for public libraries to avail of dormant account funding in 2019 and again in 2020. The funding is provided to facilitate programmes to public libraries to support disadvantaged, marginalised and socially excluded members of our communities. The funding also is importantly reliant on us utilising social partnerships and networks to deliver programmes to those most in need. The national response to this call was extensive and impactful from public libraries. I'm just going to talk about 3 of the projects we funded in Kildare, but there's been a lot of innovation nationally online over the past 10 months from public libraries here. And the first initiative we had formed part of our Let's Talk About Parenting programme. This is a series of parenting talks that we arrange with the HSE Primary Care Psychology team, TUSLA, Kildare Youth Service, the Kildare SIPSI, and the HSE Health Promotion Unit. The talks are broken down for parents of young children, teenagers, and also there's some mental health supports for parents. Since 2016, we've also incorporated a CPD element for frontline workers working with families throughout Kildare. So building on this, in 2020, the choice of topics for this CPD learning was determined by a training needs analysis that was conducted by the Kildare SIPSI amongst frontline professionals working with families in Kildare. We had arranged for 2 events to take place for these frontline workers in conjunction with Barnardo's trauma-informed practice and reflective practice. And ultimately, we had to move them, we had to push them out and host them online. And we ran them in June, and then also we ran them again in July as they were oversubscribed, as most of our online events have been during the past 10 months. The demand is definitely not waning. So we ran the courses in June and then in July, and we had a total of 66 participants who took place, who are made up of teachers, principals, and social and family workers. Also, probably a shared experience for anybody organising these type of online events is that we had wide range of interest from outside of our own county and outside of our own country even to take part in the programmes. So we had this boost in demand. So in conjunction with SIPSI, the Library Service applied for dormant account funding, and we developed this programme supporting families sharing the learning. And it kind of built on this collaborative CPD offer that we had to frontline professionals. So it was a series of free online courses for anybody who worked within the county. Again, the teams for the programme were informed by the training needs analysis that had been undertaken by Kildare SIPSI. And we ran Parents Plus facilitator training programmes through November and December. So these were 2-day facilitator training workshops for covering topics like supporting families online and by phone, parenting when separated, and for facilitators devising programs for children, adolescents, and special needs programs. That's just the first part of the program. We're currently running now from January to March additional 2-day training courses on youth mental health and first aid and motivational interviewing. So this is just some of the feedback that we got from some of the participants taking part in the course. Again, the courses were oversubscribed and feedback was very positive. Just on a practical level, what we learned from doing things this way was that the 2 days, running the course for over 2 consecutive days was a little bit challenging for professionals to manage. And some of them spoke again about the level that we have so many more online meetings now, which tend to be more impromptu in nature, and that scheduling in future, we have decided to kind of schedule courses out a little bit further to give people a little bit more of a chance to retain attendance through all of the modules. So another project we funded was our Sharing Skills project. Selbridge Library in North Kildare provides the venue and support to local volunteer community group called Sharing Skills, who pre-COVID meet in the library every week. They aim to foster social inclusion through creativity and community involvement and engagement. Many of the group members come from the local St. John of God's community services. And in the library, they do various arts and crafts projects, and they're also involved in the local biodiversity projects. And obviously during COVID, they were no longer able to meet in the library. So we looked at alternative ways to maybe engage with them online. So along with the group leader and the library service applied to the dormant account for funding to develop a programme that would work for the group. And we decided to hold 3 arts and crafts workshops via Zoom using clay and watercolours. And a pack, the way we worked it was a pack with all of the materials that the participants would need was delivered to their homes ahead of time. And then they were able to, with some assistance, get online to take part in the workshops. We also arranged a talk with Patrick Hunt on biodiversity for them, because we thought it would tie in with their work on the local pollinator project. And we invited along the Tidy Towns volunteers to work with them. So they were able to connect with people that they maybe knew. So here's some of the feedback from the group that took part in the Sharing Skills initiative. So for most of them, it was their first time using an online format. And the group leader was really happy with it and said it had opened up a world of possibility how they will continue to use it to facilitate social interaction with them. It was also a great opportunity for the group members to see one another engage socially again, to take their minds off their things and to relax using their creativity during a really challenging time for them. The participants also now have all of the work that they completed during the workshops. They made clay decorations, they painted their own plates and completed some watercolour paintings. So they have these now to show what they have achieved and to help them to mark and remember a very significant time in their lives. And the biodiversity workshop also helped them to keep them engaged and invigorate them for their work on the local pollinator project, where they'll be managing their own beehives in the spring and in the early summer. Okay, the last dormant account workshop I'm going to talk about is My Place in Space. Again, this was funded through Dormant Account and built on an existing relationship that the library service had with the Carey Girls National School. It's situated in the military camp in the Carey, and it's a DESH school, so it participates in that scheme aiming to alleviate educational disadvantage. We selected this school on the grounds that it was an all-girls school and that many of the children come from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds. So the aim of the project is really to inspire young female students to participate more in STEM subjects. And we hired Dr. Niamh Shaw, who some of you may know from RTE's After School Hub. She's an award-winning STEM communicator, scientist, engineer and performer. And she hosted 5 online workshops with girls from 5th and 6th class. They were conducted on a weekly basis through Zoom, using a combination of live interaction, hands-on instruction-based activities, videos and homework assignments for the pupils to complete with their teacher in between sessions. Niamh, Dr. Shaw actually anchored the workshops in her own experiences and her route to becoming an astrophysicist. She's trying to get to space. So she set the girls different challenges each week to get them to engage more with the world of space and their own aspirations. And she set them some challenges every week. And again, the library service would have delivered packs up to the school with materials the girls would need to take part in the workshops. So one of the things they did was they created a time capsule, and they had to put a note in it to themselves about their own dreams for the future that they were to hide or bury and open again just as they started secondary school. They also got to design their own mission patch that they would wear on their own astronaut uniform. And then they learned about rocket design and energy and forces and design their own rockets. And then they had to make a case to Dr. Shaw for one personal item that they would want to go to space with her, and why they think that would be important. This top photo I really like. The library staff member who coordinated these workshops said, you know, really it kind of captures that presence a facilitator can still have in a classroom, even when you're delivering a workshop remotely. And the teacher also really praised how interactive the workshops were, and also Dr. Shaw introduced them to some female STEM role models, which they would help them to feel more confident of their own place in space and their role within STEM, and that the girls all loved interacting and asking questions of her. Just as an additional part of this workshop, we arranged a 2-hour online CPD workshop for our own library staff around creating girls' STEMs clubs and how to create that science culture, and some tips and tricks for planning and setting up an events. So it was very well received by our staff, and we're going to look to maybe extend and develop that next year. So just moving away from the dormant accounts at the moment, the next initiative formed part of our offering under the Healthy Ireland at Your Library programme. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Healthy Ireland programme, which is now the Keeping Well campaign. In 2020, we partnered, during the COVID pandemic, we partnered with the Kildare Sports Partnership to deliver online talks. It was really just a pilot to see what kind of interest we would gauge from it. We delivered this talks to 4 secondary schools in Kildare to a total of 427 students. And we engaged the services of Dr. Mary O'Kane, who's a lecturer in psychology and education. She also runs a parenting slot on Ireland AM and contributes to the Alison Curtis show on Today FM. And Mary is one of the professionals who works with us on our Let's Talk About Parenting programme annually. So we delivered 2 talks. The first covered anxiety and how anxiety impacts on our brains and bodies, and practical ways for teenagers to help them to manage their fears during such a challenging time. Secondly, we looked at social media, and although, you know, it's important to teenagers, the importance of achieving balance, because overuse of it can, you know, affect their well-being. So she had some tips and tricks on how to achieve more balance in your life. Feedback from the teachers was really positive, and management expressed a desire to really extend the talks to more children within the school, and we are really hoping to do that. So we're going to expand the series of talks now this year as soon as we have students back in the classroom, and we're working on some talks covering topics like body confidence, self-esteem, and how to manage peer pressure. So finally, this is another programme we are supporting secondary schools. We're delighted to have received approval to work with Maynooth University as part of their Project Live initiative, which is a collaboration between academic students and external stakeholders to help support community engagement. So in November, we applied to Project Live for a pilot development of our Support to Secondary Schools project. The Support Secondary Schools project is our annual offering to secondary schools, where we have a series of tailored workshops for junior and senior cycle students on subjects such as STEM, history, literature, creative writing, sound engineering, Gaeilge, and wellbeing. So like other programs, we had to pivot all of these programs online and try to zoom them into classrooms whenever we could. In our MU Project Live proposal, we asked to partner with the Department of Maths and Stats to deliver online tutorials in small groups to senior cycle students in Kildare Town Secondary School. We were hoping that this would help to address the shortfall they would have experienced in their learning through COVID. Again, this school is in an area of high disadvantage within the county. Both the principal of the school and the academic staff have been hugely positive about the collaboration. Recruitment for the classes will happen in conjunction with the maths teachers, who will work with tutors to develop lesson plans. Library staff coordinate and host the meetings via library Zoom. So it's hoped that we will also produce some tailored recorded videos for wider circulation amongst secondary schools in the county. The programme will also importantly provide opportunities for any students particularly interested in the subject to engage with tutors at a third level and get a sense of what the subject might be like if they wanted to pursue it. So we're really delighted to have that opportunity, and one of the reasons why we're very lucky in Kildare Libraries to be situated in a county with a university, and everybody's always very generous about outreaching to us here. So I think I'm pretty much out of time. Just to say thank you to everybody for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. It was really, really awe-inspiring there to really hear about the breadth and range of workshops and services provided by our public library services. And I'm sure they've been a lifeline to so many during this pandemic. So thanks so much for taking us through that. So now I'll hand over now to Áine, our final speaker for this session. And Áine's talk is titled Turn On, Tune In, Don't Drop Out, Teaching and Engagement Approaches in Online Class Delivery. Over to you, Áine.
Thanks a million, Fiona. Just going to present this. There we go. And setting not one, but 2 timers in an effort to stay on time. So thanks, Fiona, for the introduction, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. Like both Jane and Professor Nolan mentioned, it's just so important to have these events and a follow-on from the session in May, because if we don't start capturing our experiences now, and more importantly, what we want to learn from them, before we know it, as strange as this seems, we'll have forgotten a lot of this experience. So I want to talk about the teaching engagement approaches that Maynooth University Library took on board in the last period of time, and what we've learned from them and how we might take some of those lessons forward to effecting some change. So before I go further, just to talk a bit more about my role and our teaching team. So I lead the Teaching and Research Development, TRD team in the library. And as many of you know, we adopted what we term a functional model in recent years as a replacement to a subject-based model of support. And obviously that's comprised of teaching, which is based on our information literacy strategy framework, which sets out the core information literacy competencies that we think students need to have in order to be information literate. And they are aligned to the graduate attributes that are enunciated by the Maynooth education set out by the university. Another area within that functional model is our academic liaison, supporting our non-traditional students, of which we have in Maynooth nearly 25% comprised of our student body. Moving across, we're looking at the higher level provision of higher level research skills across the research community. And all of this then is knit together essentially by our role, our academic engagement role, which is provided by Helen Farrell. That's really a two-way exchange of information and services. So us providing the information out to the academic community through Helen's role, and she also gathers that information and uses it to inform our service delivery, including our teaching. So moving ahead to teaching itself, we normally offer a menu of classes linked to the information framework competencies around searching, effective use of information for assignments, research writing, referencing, utilizing databases effectively, and many more. These are bookable online and always linked to the student point of need. At the core, these classes are activity-based, so we see the learning is happening through 3 or 4 core activities that happen within the class. And in order to determine those activities, we conduct assessment of prior learning through engagement with the academic in advance, sometimes some material provided on Moodle or VLE in advance of the class, but always by connecting with the students at the start of the session and checking where they're at and what their expectations for the session that day is. And ultimately, this learning through doing is focused very much on attainment of threshold concepts. So not about covering a body of material or work within a session, but rather by bringing students in some way through some transformative experience so that they will do something different after the class that enhances their learning and enhances their academic engagement. In practical terms, life before COVID looked like this. We delivered classes. We're really fortunate to have purpose-designed library training rooms. Generally, these were once-off classes, but we also co-deliver modules, and sometimes we have more embedded programs of instructions. As I mentioned, they're highly interactive, so there's a strong focus on student instructor engagement, and that really was a very physical environment where we were in the space with the students as activities were being conducted. The instructor and sometimes the staff member co-delivering were moving around the space, meeting the students, talking to them. And in terms, I've mentioned that they're activity-based, so we focus the material we cover on activities covered in the class, and that's our theme for learning, and with a minimal amount then of instruction provided around that. So it's a very key question for us was going to be, how could that teaching approach be adopted in any way successfully to an online format? So in terms of what we did then, like everybody else in this space, we had a combination of synchronous and asynchronous approaches. We initially thought that was going to be an either or. So we offered live Teams classes, or we suggested recording content for uploading to Moodle. As the semester continued, and we were fortunate that when we moved off-site in March, it was a quieter semester, but nonetheless a very busy period for classes. So we had an opportunity to see how the different approaches worked before the very busy first semester of this academic year. We blended both, and particularly we realised the role of recorded material ahead of live classes and what that could serve to do in terms of how we could successfully utilise live classes. I'll come back to that. The key challenge for us, which I'm going to speak about a bit more in further slides, is how we engage with students. How could we replicate that physical connection that we have from the time we enter the room, make eye contact, speak directly, provide a space for students not just to ask us about what we were covering that day, but questions they had, challenges they were facing, insecurities they had. And again, I'm really mindful of Jane's talk where we talked about acts of generosity and creating a space where students can connect and feel heard. Finally, in terms of live classes, we learned very quickly to become selective about recording it. So rather than doing a full-on recording of our 60 or 90-minute class, we chose to selectively record sections of what was meaningful within the classes. The tools that we used, and I think this has been picked up by other speakers, but what is being a real opportunity in this period is to really delve in quickly and get using tools that we either used a little bit but not wholly before, or use them in different ways, or use brand new tools. So our classes were delivered on Teams. The university took on Panopto as the tool for both live streaming of classes and recording material, and I love it. I think it's great. Not everybody has had such a successful experience with it, but for me, Panopto allows you to record directly into Moodle or VLE, and that to me is just a huge benefit of it. Screencast and Canva are two tools I mentioned there as really easy to use, easily accessible, freely available tools that we used anyway. But I know that for a lot of people, working and teaching online provide a challenge in terms of upskilling. There's so many tools of that nature that you can dive straight in and be using very effectively, very quickly. And I'm already speaking too much detail, so I have to move along. The tools we found most useful, I'm a great advocate of Menti for all the years I've been using it, and other tools like Padlet and Vivox allow you to create opportunities to engage with the student body, and I'll talk about those again. And then finally, in terms of social media, that really forms part of the necessity for you to be continually promoting and following up. So how do you let people know what you're doing? So we reinforced our key points of support, and I'll show you what this looked like by creating information graphics that demonstrate what the key messages of the library were and how we were there to help during this period. We did what we could to develop what we call access points, so ways in which we can both cover topics, and if you've looked at our poster, myself and Saoirse Dupor have a poster on this that you can take a look at, but we created opportunities for students and staff to see, oh, they are there, they are online, and this is what they can do that we mightn't have been aware of. So what that looked at quickly enough here, I had lots and lots of meetings. I met so many academics, and while that mightn't be sustainable to do as many meetings in the future, it provided me with a really wonderful opportunity to create new connections and opportunities to collaborate. In that meeting, as we always did, we looked at the assignments and particularly considered what were the key concerns that both the academic and the student would have. And then decisions were made around the breakdown of content, what should be pre-recorded, what worked well in that context, and what needed to be conducted in the live class. In terms of the class delivery, and I will come back to this point in a few minutes, but the starting point for every class was the sense of achieving that engagement in whatever way you could. So how are you and what do you want to find out about today? And I'll tell you how I did that in a moment. Delivered the class with recording of segments, and also something that we had to really get used to, and it was a particular learning curve for me, be able to embrace the silence in the class, allow people the opportunity, because you can't see them, to pause and consider what you're saying. Let there be silence while people think about questions they might have, and don't be afraid to see what happens when there's dead air and what might come back to you after a while. And then after the class, as usual, sharing the recordings and feedback to VLE and taking opportunities to engage one-on-one. So just what that looks like then, this, for example, taken from Moodle, might be the content we put up prior to delivering a session. That's a recorded tutorial that I did in Panopto that was available to the students in advance. And then after the class, we shared slides and links to other material, including tutorials, guides, and other videos that would complement what we covered in the class. So from my point of view, the level of interaction afforded by online delivery has been really, really successful. I mentioned the student pathway. This excellent infographic was developed by the TRD team, and the design is the work of Saoirse on our team, who does excellent work on this. And you can see those key messages, and through everything that we did, both in our classes, both in interactions with students, meetings with academics, Helen's library rep meetings, we kept emphasizing these points to remind all of our user groups that we were there and how we could interact. So moving on to the more important, our lessons learnt. Ooh, it's going to be tight. Our lessons learnt and then the way forward. So the lessons are that this has been an extremely challenging time, but it's also been rewarding because we've had so many opportunities to do things that if we planned them, we could never have done them. So that has been wonderful. Also, given what we do, we're really privileged that we've been able to work safely from home, and a lot of the online delivery suits what we do. So for example, it allowed us to have a flexibility of approach that solves a lot of our existing problems. The maximum capacity of our library training rooms was 44, and most academics wanted the students to come to the library. Now we could reach vastly greater numbers without any difficulty. We could also go more in depth and really drill down into our collections and our online resources and show them effectively. I mentioned the fact that it allows me to create new networks of collaboration, and I felt I worked so successfully with my academic colleagues because we were all trying to figure out the same thing at the same time. I want to just say really briefly that I think there's a real opportunity for online delivery to have a levelling effect and achieve some parity of roles. And in fact, it might even enhance engagement. So I think in some ways, when we're all on a screen and we're all sitting in our kitchens and we all have interruptions from the kids or whatever it might be, there's a way in which I think it affords a way to have a more honest dialogue and be on the same page as the students. And I have a lot to say about that, but I don't have time. I've talked a lot about engagement throughout this, and I'm just showing up an example of a slide. I said that after one of my first classes, which was those black tiles and no engagement and me really talking for about 50 minutes, so the exact opposite to what we wanted to do in our engagement activity-driven classes, I started asking students at the beginning, how are you doing today? And initially, and you'll see anything can come up there, you know, don't leave Sharon, but you'll also see people saying good, yeah, fine. But if you leave it a couple of minutes, and I used to prattle on a little bit as I was giving them some space and time, you'd start to see words coming up like overwhelmed, nearly dropped out, missing face-to-face, stressed. And what it allowed myself and usually the lecturer who was with me to do was explore those feelings and validate them, let students know that they were heard, and let them know that we shared some of those as well. And I think that also went a long way, I found, to replicating that sense of trust that you would get from physically standing in front of somebody. Fiona, you can't be here already. So very briefly in my last 2 minutes, and I'm sorry to move this because I'm blocking my screen. Life after this COVID period, we have an opportunity for change, but we need to have that dialogue now. Can we achieve a balance between face-to-face and online? I think what we need to do now is ask ourselves, when things start to change, as they will, and we're more on site, and maybe we're still some online delivery, some face-to-face, what is that balance? So I think there's a lot of material that can still be very successfully delivered online, and then we can decide what needs to be face-to-face and what works. And it will be challenging, because some of the things that worked effectively, we'd really struggle to do those when we have to have that combination. I really want to spend some time with my team and my wider library colleagues thinking about how you create in an online environment that connection and a supportive space for students to engage further. I found when I was willing to stop and wait, and by the end of last semester I was handing over assignments to do not in any massive way, not breakout rooms, just getting students to do an assignment, turning off my mic, giving them 5 or 6 minutes and regrouping. And I found that that was really productive and the students responded. And I also felt really invigorated by the conversations I had with my academic colleagues. And I think, not that we didn't do this, but I think we can move even more centrally into helping to develop teaching as an approach across the university arena. So I'm just looking, I have 20 seconds, so I'm going to put all of this up, and apologies that it's so brief, but I'd love to chat further at some stage. For me, library teaching of the future should really look like that it's collection focused, it's driven by engagement, the format is directed by need, and we really look to shared resources. So in terms of collection, my timer has just gone off there, so I'll finish quickly. In terms of collection, the one thing that really happened this time was that panicked, in some cases, academics and students came to us going, what can we use, what can we use? Because they did feel that the library was closed initially when we had to shut down, and they realized they had to use the online resources. Now, we know that that's not the case, but we need to get that out. So we really need to get our collections into the teaching arena and align them with our courses. We need to learn in an online environment how to start where the students are and the ways that we can innovatively create dialogue. I'll just skip to the very last one to say that the one thing I really want to do in the role that I have within Maynooth, and also I'm on the Connell Teaching and Learning Committee, we need to start sharing our resources more widely. Finding ways that we can share the tools themselves, but also the practices and procedures that we developed. Every webinar I went to, I saw somebody doing something that I went, oh, I could utilize that, but there must be a better way to share all of those together. And just finally, as I say, thank you to you for listening today, and I would really love to hear all of your contributions, and I'm happy for anyone to contact me. I want to just finish as well by extending a really huge thank you to all of my colleagues, particularly on the teaching and research development team, and my academic colleagues as well, who were such a support of support and innovation throughout the year. And I think it has been a really wonderful time to work with them all. And thanks very much. And Fiona, sorry for going a little bit over time there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Áine. Definitely teaching, delivery and student engagement posed one of the biggest challenges for teaching librarians, but also became really an opportunity for remarkable innovations, and it was really fascinating to hear about that, and lots there we can keep. So thank you again, and indeed thank you to all of our speakers for this session. Virtual round of applause for everybody. Now we have probably not much time, but maybe a little time for a question or two. So I'm just going to check the chat.
Fiona, I sent you a direct message as well if you're looking for a question. I had a question for
Yes,
Gethin
I have that
just
question actually.
Yep,
and we might start with that question while I check for others. So a question here for Brendan and Gethin. Dealing with such technical information, how do you manage the interface with medical experts and your own understanding of the in-depth concepts to produce the evidence summaries that you talked about? So maybe if Brendan or Gethin can come in on that.
Thanks, Áine. One of the things we included in the protocol is reading into the question and doing a background search that serves two purposes: that we know what the question is actually about, and secondly, it helps build us up the vocabulary for the search. And in terms of engaging with the clinical experts, we have a bi-weekly meeting on Mondays and Thursdays with Dervla Gray, who's the lead program manager with the national clinical programs. So there's a lot of over and back to the national clinical programs, and also of course it's accessible to ordinary frontline healthcare workers. And the questions, we very much emphasize that there's no difference between a question that's coming from a clinical program or for someone that's struggling with COVID on a ward.
Thanks very much. I see another question here from Michelle for Áine, asking she wonders if you captured knowledge levels prior to every session that people had to register for, and if you used online follow-up evaluations and how that went.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is probably not really, but that's something we're working on. One of the things we didn't do a huge amount anyway in at the sense of, I suppose, thinking of the HSC's word evidence, was necessarily follow up in that sense afterwards. But we have realised that in terms of making decisions going forward, that's imperative. I suppose what we did do in a kind of softer way, so the way we check people's learning is usually that engagement at the beginning through Menti. Often we'd ask them to complete a poll. What had they used before, what their experience has been. And we did follow up in pre-COVID times. We followed up that with the lecturers and the students afterwards in an informal sense, probably asking for feedback and rating the class. What we've been able to do initially, at least, is by being embedded in the courses on Moodle, we can actually track things like how they're engaging with the material we put up and how it's being used. And that has informed us, for example, don't record a 60-minute class because nobody will ever look at it and things like that. But absolutely, there's a way to go. And I suppose, particularly looking at my colleagues in the health libraries and other areas, I'd be really interested in, you know, having that conversation about the best way to record those metrics. So thanks for that question, Michelle.
Okay, and I see another question actually for yourself, Áine, just asking how often the classes were offered, multiple times a week, every couple of weeks, or at particular times to encourage attendance, such as lunchtime or evenings.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So these classes that I spoke about chiefly were the ones that were requested by academics, and it's no minimization of it to say that we're absolutely rushed off our feet. So we have a number of colleagues who have teaching responsibilities on the team, and we were really flat out. So the way those classes were delivered was that academics would make the request to our team, and that translated into multiple classes a day. And I would probably say for most of September to December, what I did every day was either meet an academic about a class, prepare for the class, and deliver a class. We were swamped, and that particularly isn't necessarily sustainable, and we know that that's not a new problem. We've always been trying to see what we can create in a recorded format to alleviate the necessity for all the live classes. And what I would say was starting to happen by the end of the semester is that we were getting better at creating more standardized recorded content and reusing content. And we were doing things like, rather than a full class, we were dropping into classes for maybe 10 to 15 minutes to do those live Q&A sessions. So yeah, the volume of classes was massive this year, which is good and challenging at the same time. Thanks very much for the question.
And I see a question here, interested to know how we get to the balance between face-to-face and online, as the face-to-face is a drain on limited resources. So maybe that's something for the future, how we might reach a balance.
That for me, Fiona?
I think that's for you, Áine.
Yeah,
sorry.
So I'll just say, I'm sure now, I know we need to move on to the next session. I think I'd love to have more of these conversations, and actually a little bit of shameless promotion here, but on the 11th of February, the Connell Teaching and Learning Seminar takes place. Same format on Zoom, morning event, and we'll really be drilling into that a bit. I think what I would say is that it's very much thinking about the point of need. I mean, something that is instantly going to be available to us when we do go back on campus in Maynooth, and I'm sure many of you are the same. We now have Panopto live recording equipment installed in our training rooms. So now if we want to do a class to many hundreds where we couldn't have accommodated in the library from the first time we set foot back on campus, we can live stream that class, record it, but also live stream it out to the students. So like, it's so exciting to think that something that was becoming a bit of an insurmountable problem now has a solution. On the other hand, that going back to Jane's comment about the connectivity and the supportive space, we do know that with the best engagement online, you still will have opportunities where people won't be able to have those maybe personal or worrying conversations with you where they need additional support. So that's where we need to prioritise having face-to-face engagement. And, you know, I know that is something that's always done very successfully, and by my own colleagues in the EIS team at the front of house who deal with so many of those type of issues. Sorry.
Thanks,
I could say
Áine.
loads. I know I have to shut up. Thanks for all the questions.
I think timing-wise, we might have to leave it there. Apologies if I missed any questions, but just to make you aware that all of the presenters are happy to be contacted if you have further questions.